Thank you very much, Caitlin. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out. It's okay to yawn, fall asleep, but hopefully you're wide awake after that passionate session. Which one goes forward? Great. Okay, so I have no disclosures. I want to start by why this is important. Why is coding and billing important? And I agree with you full-heartedly. I clapped when you said this should have been the first session and not the last session. Because all the techniques you heard about, all the procedures all week long here are irrelevant and just intellectual exercises if you can't get them paid and reimbursed, both for yourself and for your healthcare system. Because if you cannot get payment for these things for yourself and your hospital, we're all going bankrupt. So just a small quote about my first job with my first group. I got pulled out into a room by my senior partner sometime into my third year, and he literally sat me down and he told me, you need to do less laparoscopy and more open surgery to improve your productivity. I was flabbergasted. I was hired as an MIS surgeon. I did not understand. My patients went home in 3-4 days. I had the least morbidity, no complication, no death rate, nothing. And here, instead of applauding me, he wanted me to convert to open surgery. I was devastated, and eventually I left within a few months. But now that I'm at the other end of it, I understand productivity is crucial. He may not have the right language to address that with me, but productivity is important to remain solvent. And we need to make sure, as a society and as a group of professionals, that our patient goals and our business interests remain aligned. And if you know anything about coding, you will know that most laparoscopic procedures pay less than their open counterparts. People who hear that are flabbergasted, but that is true. Okay, so now I went and opened my own practice. I took your advice, I left, and made a new deal for myself. I've been running my practice for 12 years. And I found, when Caitlin asked me to give this talk, I was like, I don't think I'm the right person to give this talk. Of all the things I've had to overcome, this has been the most challenging thing I've ever had to do. I've changed 6 billing companies in 12 years. I've cumulatively lost possibly several years' worth of unbilled work and probably a couple of millions of dollars in production that was left on the table. So I gave myself a D- in this category. And if anyone else knows how to do it better, please come up and I'll be happy to sit down and learn from you. So I can't really probably tell you how to do it well. I can tell you what mistakes not to make. And maybe next year we can have a session from someone who knows how to do it well. Why has billing and collections been such a challenge for me? I will say, as a group of professionals, it's always been an afterthought. Again, we see all these Medscape, MGMA, all these kind of data and graphs and charts about what's the median average income for a general surgeon in such and such community, and you believe it. And we come out expecting, if I do good work, I should get paid fairly and make a decent living. Think about it. Honestly, that's why it's completely neglected in our training. My sister is a dentist, and from day one in dental school, they have a business of dentistry class. When she came up and graduated, she was so savvy. I went with her to kind of evaluate practices. The kinds of things she looked at, I was devastated. No one taught us anything because it was just an assumption that we'll be paid fairly. And it's also somehow taboo and hard to talk about money within our field, and we need to get over that. I will tell you another reason it's been really challenging. It feels like people keep moving this goalpost, okay? There are regulations that keep changing. The minute you learn something, it flips and changes. It's been a very long and a very tough learning curve, and I can't tell you how much harder it has been to learn this than any surgical procedure I've had to learn. And I will tell you at the end of it, if you learn nothing from what I say, just remember the system is rigged to not pay you. Okay? It is not, it's unfathomable, but that's how it is. It's set up to not pay you. And the sooner you learn that and realize that, the better you can become your own advocate. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time just going through some things that I think everyone leaving this session should know, and hopefully you can be wiser than I was. I'm hoping people know about CPTs, ICDs, RVU, global, and modifier. We'll get into some of that. So ICD-10 and CPT codes are the numerical language by which medical terminologies communicate with the payers, okay? So they don't sit and read your op reports. They want a numerical code to see how much to pay you, okay? And the same goes for diagnoses. Every diagnosis has an assigned numerical code. Now make sure when you code your procedures, that the code you put for your diagnosis matches the code that is appropriate procedure for that diagnosis. That's the first reason things get denied. Also, every patient encounter has a code too. So you can't say, I saw the patient and discussed the consult and spent 40 minutes. No, there's a code for that. That's how you communicate with the payers. Now, there are different categories of codes. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into that, but I will split them into E&M codes, which are the evaluation and management codes, which are your patient encounter codes. These can be inpatient, outpatient, ICU, emergency room. These are one-time codes. Every time you see a patient, you code for that. There's one-time codes. There's no global. It doesn't cover anything before that visit or after that visit. Now, procedure codes are a little different. These are meant to include some pre-procedure and post-procedure activity that is deemed to be typical for that typical patient and within the boundaries of that typical procedure. So that usually includes your, conversation with the patient, the pre-op area, whatever you do skin to skin, and then any post-op visits, whether it's in the hospital or outpatient. This is all considered the global period by which that CPT code covers that work. Now, you can do procedures that have 0-day global, meaning they're only covered for whatever you do that day. These are minor procedures like endoscopies, line placements, tracheostomies. There are 10-day global periods that cover things like abscess INDs, and then pretty much the majority of everything we do intraoperatively is a 90-day global, anything considered a major surgery. And that means every patient encounter after the day of the procedure for the next 3 months, if it's related to the surgery you did, is covered within whatever payment you got. So you can't keep billing for every time the patient calls you or comes and sees you and has a bogus complaint. Now, this CPT code is just a number, okay? How that number translates to payment is through the RVU system, which is the relative value unit. So the RVU is a scale by which CMS and Medicare assess the value for each CPT and then reimburse the patient, all the physicians' works based on a common denominator. So they value 1 unit is equal to whatever number, and we'll talk about that. And then they assigned how many units per CPT. And so your primary care visit, or the primary care that did an EKG, has a certain CPT, a certain RVU for that procedure, and you doing your Whipple has a certain number of RVUs for that procedure. So we're all using the same common denominator, the numerator varies. So how are RVUs calculated? What you need to know is the total RVU, which is a combination, is a formula, and it's on here, is a work RVU, which again includes the time. It's a combination of time spent in that encounter or that procedure and the intensity. And it's usually corroborative. So the assumption is if you're spending a lot of time, then it was probably more intense and stressful kind of situation, and so the work RVU is higher. Then there's calculated practice expense RVU and then malpractice RVU. The practice expense is your overhead supplies, how many gauze sponges you would have used in the office to remove a wound, packing or whatever. And the malpractice RVU, again, what's your professional liability within your region? So now that's the total RVU, but as we know, practicing in a rural community is very different as far as expenses go than LA urban city where I work. And so there's a geographical factor that it's multiplied by. And that varies based on your overhead expenses and also malpractice policies in your state. So that total RVU is multiplied by a geographic factor, and then if you want to know how much you're going to pay, you have to figure out what's the conversion factor for your year. And right now in 2022 is $34.60 per RVU unit. So you figure out how many RVUs your procedure has, multiplied by 34, and you see how much you're going to get paid. Now, the next thing you need to know are modifiers. Now, like I said, CPT codes are for your typical procedure on a typical patient. Now, we know there's a lot of atypia in what we do. Not every patient is, cookie cutter. So when you want to qualify those atypical scenarios, you have to use modifiers. Modifiers can upcode or downcode what your payment is going to be, and you have to be very careful if you use upcode modifiers a lot, because that can trigger an audit. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these in the interest of time. You can take a picture. We can talk about it after the fact. But there are a lot of modifiers that are very important to know what you're doing, okay? For example, I'm just going to take modifier 50, no, let's see. You can do a modifier 51, okay? If you do multiple procedures, okay, the first higher procedure, the biggest code, let's say you're doing a lap sigmoid, okay? You put the lap sigmoid as your number one CPT. Every code after that, let's say you did a splenic flexure mobilization, you have to put a modifier 51 next to it. And then let's say if you do a ureteral lysis or something because your ureter was in the way, you have to put a modifier 51 after it. If you don't put the modifier 51, it won't get paid. If you put the modifier 51, you will get 50% of what was assigned to that code had it been just a sole procedure. So again, these are very complicated. We can talk about it afterwards, but just remember that you need to, if you add any CPT more than one on any procedure, you need to have a modifier next to it, otherwise it won't get paid. Now, there have been some E&M code changing. Now, there are, actually, how do I go back? There are some modifiers for E&M codes too, and this is very important. If you're seeing a consult on the day or day before a procedure, if you don't put the modifier on it, they're gonna assume it's just your pre-op visit. So if you consult in the ER for an appy and then took the patient up to the OR, you need to use that modifier 57. If you don't, that consult is for free. Same goes for your office visit. Let's say you see a patient in the office and they're choking on a piece of steak and you then take him and do an endoscopy. You need to use that modifier 25, otherwise your consult is for free. So these are things you need to know if you want to keep track of your payments. Now, there were some changes. Most of us that were trained in the last decade are fully aware of the redundancy of what E&M coding was based on, which is like a 15-point review system and a whole bunch of history and physical that was completely irrelevant to what we were seeing him on. Now, last year, this all changed from that bullet format to time-based or medical decision-making based. And again, go review it if you're not aware of it, because now you can actually avoid wasting a lot of time and spend more time on counseling the patient. Now, some of the pitfalls, I'm going to speed through, I know I'm fast, sorry. So learn your coding. Like I said, there are plenty of resources. The ACS has a really good coding course. I highly recommend, if you've never taken it, take it. Dictate your CPT codes in your op report. If you don't want people to downcode for you, write in there what your code should be. And then they have to actually come and argue with you if they want to code it below that. And make sure you know the definitions of your CPT terminology, and also if you're going to upcode with a modifier 22, that you actually know what's expected to be written in that note. Also, you need to know CCI edit, concurrent coding initiatives. That means that you cannot code two certain codes together. It's assumed if you're doing one, you're also doing the other. It's very important when we dictate, for example, we did a laparoscopic right hemicolectomy, oftentimes we also say we took the appendix out. We did an appendectomy, mostly for informational purposes that the patient, still had an appendix and it was removed. But guess what? If your coder codes both of those as separate procedures with a modifier 51 or not, the whole thing will get denied, because the assumption is if you're taking out a colon, right colon, the appendix is coming out with it. You cannot bill extra for that. So you got to know these things. So when you get a denial, you can go out and see what they did wrong. Do I have 2 more minutes? Okay. There are different practice models. So if you're an RVU-based surgeon, employed surgeon, you can pretty much stop here, and you don't need to hear anything about collection because you don't care. It doesn't affect you. But there's also a capitation model, which was referred to, that some people get paid for patient care up front, and that is a capitation model. You get paid per lives you cover, not pay services you perform. But the rest of us who are in the fee-for-service arena rely on our billing and, most importantly, on our collection to actually see any money. And where does that come from? It's from our contracting. And we spent a whole session on contracting. I'm not going to review this, but like I said, and I highlighted it, that every contract is negotiable, whether it's with your insurers or your hospital, and so keep that in mind. Some of the pitfalls of billing: make sure you hire a surgical coder and biller. Don't assume just because they say they've done some surgical coding, they know what that means. And don't assume they're certified, okay? You need proof, because I've been burned so many times by people who do medical billing, who are not aware of globals, who don't know how to bill for surgeries and modifiers, screw me over on my payments. You can do it in-house or you can outsource. There are different kinds. And again, I disagree on, I think someone earlier said, you don't have to worry about that. There's professionals who do that. The degree you get to become a biller and coder is an associate degree. They are not the professional. You are the professional, okay? They're just an employee that's submitting doing a data entry. You need to tell them how to bill versus vice versa. You are the expert in the room, okay? Also, if you're hospital-based, separate your coding, and if you can, your billing, from your hospital billing and coding department, because the hospital billers and coders are the biggest piece of the pie is the hospital payment. So they're gonna go for that $20,000 bill that the hospital is gonna get for their lab chole versus your $600. So their energy is gonna spend on that. It's to your best interest that you have your own coder, you have your own biller, that at least if you cannot use that to actually get payments, to double check what the hospital is billing for you. It's worth the investment that you make in that. Incentivize your biller, okay? This is very important. People work for money. And if you incentivize them just based on percentage, 5 to 6% is the standard for surgical practice, you will miss all your E&M codes. They're gonna spend hours trying to appeal your big bills, your one surgery that got denied, but they will not spend they don't care if they get $5 out of your $100 E&M visit, okay? So I always incentivize them for that with additional like flat fee per E&M receipt. So they get $5 for every E&M visit that they cash out for me, they get an extra $5. And if we get 100 E&Ms paid for, that's an extra $500 they get at the end of the day. Anyways, I'm gonna end on that because we don't have much time. Make sure your claims are filed on time and clean. And anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask me at the end. Sorry. There's a lot of resources in this too.